Hello, my name is Paul. I'm the developer of Hyperion Synth. This video is the first video in a series of tutorial videos that I'm making about Hyperion. In this video, I'm going to cover the basics of Hyperion user interface and how to get up and running with selecting and playing sound patches. When you first load the plugin, the interface is going to look like this. Nothing will be loaded and you'll have an empty patch editing graph. The interface is split into several sections. On the top bar, you have the master controls for the volume. You have a way to globally mute the audio. You can kill MIDI notes with the All Notes Off button. You can change the zoom level, which is quite useful for high DPI screens or even older low resolution screens. You might want to drop the zoom level. There's an information button, which takes you to general information about the plugin, where you can also open up the user guide. On the top bar, there's also a registration status, and if you haven't registered, there will be an unlock button there, which will open up a window where you can enter your registration information. And to the very right of the top bar, there's a CPU load indicator as well as a build number. The rest of the interface is split into three main areas. On the left, you have the patch browser. To the right of that, you have the layers. And to the right of that, you have layer-specific controls and a layer-specific patch editing graph area. So these tabs at the bottom here are actually specific to each layer that's currently loaded. Currently, we only have one layer available, but if I want to add more layers into my existing patch, I can keep adding layers by clicking on the plus button. Just beneath the layer controls, there's actually a auto hiding control area which you can pin, and this is the macro controls. These macro controls are global to the whole synth and will affect every layer at the same time. Also here you have a virtual keyboard where you can also select the MIDI channel that it represents, and that is also going to set the global MIDI receive channel for the macros. You can learn the macros by clicking on the MIDI learn button, and you can assign CC controls just by highlighting the macro CC number and then turning the knobs on your controller to set them up as you want them. So let's have a look at how you load a sound. At first, when you launch the plugin, the patch list might be empty on the left here, but you can fix that by browsing to the demo patches by clicking on the Select Current Patch Directory button. And you'll find the demo patches should be in your user directory or the shared users directory. Select the demo patches folder, and as long as there are patches stored there, Hyperion should start scanning and refreshing the list. You can click the refresh list button at any time, but if you do change directories, it will refresh the patch list automatically. And if you save any patches, this will also happen. When you click on items in the patch list, you can see information about the patch in the area above the patch list. There are two kinds of patches that are stored. There are single layer patches, and there are what's known as combi patches, which are multi-layer patches. So let's just do an example of that. We click on a single layer patch, and you can see only one layer has been loaded up. You can see the scope is active. Here, if you want, you can change the zoom level on the scope trace. And you can also change the amount of time the scope is looking at, so you can use that to see more clearly what's going on with the sound. If you want, you can just turn the scope off or freeze it by clicking on the Scope Enable toggle button. Let's load a multi-layer patch by clicking on a combi style patch. And you'll see that multiple layers have been loaded up. Each layer has its own patch design and its own settings for its volume and transpose settings as well as the MIDI receive channel. So let's have a look at the top one here. Here I can change the layer volume individually. I could mute the layer, or I could solo it. I can also, if I want to, pick individual MIDI receive channels for each layer, which might be handy if you have 2 or 3 keyboards or for different performance reasons. Here you can, on the left, you can change the transpose amounts, and you can set the keyboard range and the velocity range for each layer as well. You can set the range by moving the sliders, but you can also click on the buttons to the left and the right of the range to learn the note range or the velocity range by just hitting the keyboard or whatever controller you have, and it will update based on the last values that were received when you press the keys. So I won't talk about patch editing in this video because that's probably a little bit too much for one session. That'll be the next video that I make. But if you have a look at the patch area, you can see that underneath it we have these tabs, and these are specific controls for each layer. Let's load a combi patch that lets us show off how each layer can have different settings. So now if I click between these layers, you'll see on some of the layers, or at least on one of the layers, the arpeggiator is turned on, and on other layers it's not. So that just shows you that for each layer you can have individual arpeggiation settings. So just now I decided to filter the patch list by combis so that I could find a specific combi. I can also filter by patches, by single layer patches. That's really handy if I want to add a new layer and I want to make sure I don't delete my current setup. So I can just filter by single layer patches only and load in a sound on a new layer, and that way I'll be sure that I won't wipe out my current combi design. If you want to remove one of the layers, you can click on the X button next to the within the patch layer controls. Another useful feature of the patch database is the filtering, where you can type in the beginning of an author name and it will filter the patch list by the first letters that it sees as you type them in. You can also select a patch type, and maybe I only want to look at bass sounds, for example. And you can also filter by patch categories. So maybe I only want to look at warm bass sounds, and these are tags that I've assigned when I saved the patches. So when you're happy with a set of layers and you want to save them as a combi patch, you can click on the Save Layers as Combi Patch button, the save icon here, and it will let you save a combi patch. You can enter the name here, you can set your author name, add some notes if you need to, and here you can set the types and the categories for the sound. You don't have to select categories, but it's kind of handy if you want to then search for specific sound types. If you made some edits to the patch design, you might only want to save one individual layer as a patch. Then you can click on the Save Patch button, which is within that graph area. And then when you save a patch, it will only save it as a single layer patch rather than a combi. If you click on the individual nodes in a patch, you'll see on the right hand side a panel will pop open which will let you edit the values for each of those node settings. and you can scroll up and down through this list, or you can remove the items. The last node that you click on will go to the top of the list. You can even drag these around if you need to. You can hide that area by clicking on the icon to the right. One thing to note is that most of the icons, most of the buttons have tooltips, so you just put your mouse over them and you can see in the center of the screen here, there'll be a tooltip to tell you what that is, what it does. So for example, this is a duplicate layer button. So if I want to maybe I want to make an octave or a detuned version of the same patch, I can copy that layer by clicking the duplicate button. And now I have two patches called FM bass. Maybe I want to set one of them up to a different pitch offset. Or maybe I want it to only trigger when I hit a certain velocity. Just below the patch list is a settings area where you can check the lock master volume and lock ARP settings options. When you're loading a patch, the arpeggiator settings are specific to each layer that gets loaded, and also when you save the patch, those arpeggiator settings get saved with the patch. Sometimes you might want to keep your current ARP settings and not have them overwritten by the new patch that's being loaded. So you can lock the ARP settings. So here we go, let's show that. So maybe I want to load a different sound into this layer, but I want to keep the ARP settings. And you can see that when I loaded it, it didn't get rid of the ARP settings, but if I uncheck that checkbox and I reload that same sound, you'll see that the ARP settings have been cleared. Same with the master volume. When you load a combi, the master volume is actually saved with the combi, and that's kind of handy, but sometimes you might not want the master volume to get changed. So if I load a new combi here, and then maybe I reduce the master volume and I load a different combi, and I've made sure that I've checked the lock master volume, and you'll see that the master volume has not been changed. I think that just about covers the general user interface. In the next video, I'll talk more about patch editing, how to connect modulation sources, and how to change the modulation mixes, and in general about the whole patch design area, what the different colors of the nodes represent, and walk you through in general what kind of nodes exist and how you could use them to design a sound.